Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Surprising Realities About Risk Perception. It's a pleasure to welcome our speaker, Denise Shull. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Beth.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. Can you hear me okay?
It's one of the reasons I said hi right off the bat. I think the sound is just fine. And
okay.
As I said, we're very pleased to welcome Denise. This is the second time that Denise is presenting in the CQG webinar series, so welcome back. And as always, before we get started, I'll cover some brief housekeeping. And I'm Betty Smith, by the way. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at CQG. All right, so for the housekeeping, you can submit questions at any point during Denise's presentation today. Please use the Q&A feature. So in the web conference view, that's the lower right-hand corner, and you can submit your questions at any time. When we're in full screen view, there's a floating toolbar at the top, and you can use the Q&A feature there. If at any time during the presentation you have difficulty hearing us or any other type of technical difficulty, please use the chat feature and our host will get right with you. The chat feature in the web conference view is in the middle right hand of the screen. And again, when we're in full screen view, that will be on the floating toolbar. As always, we'll be recording today's webinar and it will be available within a few days on our real-time news site, news.cqg.com. All right, so we'll get rolling with this. It's really nice to have Denise back here for the webinar series. A very brief introduction. She's the principal of the Rethink group, which is a psychological risk management and human performance consultancy. She's a thought leader in the psychology of risk, uncertainty, and exceptional performance, and the author of the recent book, Market Mind Games, which I'll remind all of you who are registered for today, we'll have a random drawing after the webinar, and we'll let you know who will receive a signed copy of Denise's book. So Denise, please feel free to add anything else about yourself before you jump into your presentation.
I think you about covered it. There we go. Let's see. What I'm having a little bit of an issue with is the box to forward the slides that I saw yesterday. I don't see now. So can we work together to forward slides?
Sure, we can. You should be the presenter. Do you see the floating toolbar at the top? Or you can also use your space bar.
If I can just use my space bar, that'll.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that, gang. All right. So, surprising realities about risk perception. You all are looking at a picture of what I recently found out was a Great Dane. I thought it was a Dalmatian, French bulldog, rabbit, cat. What I think is a white rat down there and some kind of parrot. And basically, we could all figure that out in, quite quickly, measured in less than a second, as soon as we see the picture. But a computer can't do that so easily. And what I really want to talk about today is a lot of the elements that actually go into your ability to understand this picture so quickly without even giving it any conscious thought. There's a lot of unconscious activity going on, and essentially my objective is to help you all get more familiar with what that unconscious activity is so that you can start to make it conscious and make it an edge that you have. So let's just cover some basics. Knighting uncertainty, and for those of you who don't know the term, it was Frank Knight in 1921 at the University of Chicago who pointed out that things like markets are fundamentally uncertain, and no matter how many probabilities you wrap around them, you actually couldn't know, in contrast to dice, for example, when the probabilities are absolutely certain. The thing that's important about knighting uncertainty in your brain and risk perception is your brain will compel you to make a judgment call when it detects this kind of fundamental uncertainty. So when you're staring at your CQG screens, basically your psyche is compelling you to make a judgment call. You're trying to do something called plan the trade and trade the plan, and lots of times you don't trade the plan. I know that because I've talked to so many traders at so many stripes and ilks and types, from banks to hedge funds to retail guys with not much money and everything in between and on either end. And everybody's brain compels them to make a judgment call because it's the way the human brain is built. So the first thing to actually do is realize that you are going to make judgment calls and be planning your trading plan, your overall plan, such that you build judgment call room into it and you put yourself in a position to make the best judgment calls possible. So as we've already seen with the animals, but is well documented now in science, most of what you perceive at any given moment is actually happening unconsciously. It's only the very tip of the iceberg that you're really aware of. And what I mean is all of the information you're taking in, how you're processing it, what it means, it's only the very tip of the iceberg that you're actually aware that you're thinking about. And what we now know is that very thinking relies on way more than your intellect. I happen to have here at my left a relatively new article, as in I just got it in the past couple of weeks, called Embodied Cognition. And what that means is how much we think with our bodies, but it's a summary article that lists all of the studies showing the connection between mind and body. So, for example, one of the studies that I didn't know existed until I started to scan this article was that you can do a complex math problem better, or research shows you can answer a complex math problem better if you're moving your hands. Now, I don't know about you, but it's a little bit hard to imagine people sitting at their desks and think, an image that comes to mind is someone taking the SAT test or the financial risk management exam, and maybe that's because I know someone who just took it, moving their hands. But actually it would do them well to do that because somehow it stimulates or has something to do with the parts of the brain that have to do with complex math. Another thing we know is that your brain literally builds socially, so your environment that you are born into influences the structure of the brain, influences the way things are done in the brain, influences the order and the mechanism. So the greatest example that I know of that makes it really clear is if you spoke a native Asian language, you were born into a household that spoke native Asian language versus a native Germanic language, you literally do 2 + 2 = 4 through a completely different way in your brain than if you spoke native English or native any Germanic language. The theory about that actually has to do with the fact that the Asian languages require much more complexity in writing the numbers, but no one really knows for sure why it is. All we know at this point is that depending on which language you spoke, your brain does something as simple as 2 + 2 = 4 in a different way. My point being that what's going on, underneath the surface is so complex, and we're really just starting to expose it. And I give you these examples basically to support that point so that you're motivated to spend a little bit more time uncovering what's going on behind the scenes because, like I said, I think you can turn it into an edge. And then for those of you who've heard me before, you've certainly heard me talk about theory of mind, which is an academic term for reading other people, but the research also shows that if you think of markets in terms of other people and who's going to be buying something for more or selling something for less, and that you literally put it in the human terms, just as a thought experiment, you're likely to come up with a more accurate answer. If you think about it, that actually makes a lot of sense because at the end of the day, it's only other people that you're trading, even though they might be using machines, etc. We think of the markets as a numbers game, and really it's a human perception war game, if you will. So This is essentially all about what we now know about your brain on risk and beyond before behavior. So behavior is the end result. And most of psychology and trading psychology focuses on the end result. I take this from the completely opposite point of view. I take it from what are we perceiving, both that we're aware of and that we're not aware of, that's then causing us to make a certain judgment call, causing us then to make a decision that we enact in behavior. I think if we unravel the perception piece of it, the behavior becomes easy, as opposed to telling ourselves to behave a different way and then really not being able to do it. The reason you're not being able to do it is because behavior is truly the end result, and the qualitative realms of feelings, emotions, and everything that's going on, feelings, emotions, thoughts in the unconscious, is what's driving that behavior. And unless you unravel that, you're basically going to keep telling yourself to do one thing while if you continue to make the same mistakes that you don't want to make, that we all know that we all make. Not all the time, but more of the time than not. So just to support that, and my tagline, Rethink Thinking, or my company's tagline, a couple of years ago, Charlie Rose did a series on the brain, and in that you heard a number of neuroscientists say we need a whole new model of the brain. That was just 2010. Neuroeconomics is very focused on what I earlier called this embodied cognition, but a more simple way of saying it is mind-body cognition, which leads to things also like taking breaks, standing up, decision fatigue, getting away from the screen. I mean, we now know that the brain easily gets tired. It's hard to make a number of good decisions in a row, i.e. trading is much more like being an athlete than it is like a fully intellectual game. R. Douglas Fields is somebody I talk about in my book, but he's done a lot of research basically showing that what's called white matter or junk in the brain, the cells, is where all of the interesting action is. And it's basically refuting that old you only use 10%, because what we used to think is neurons and synapses, the core elements in the brain, are like 10% by volume. So what's going on in the rest of it, you'll still hear people. By the way, I'm actually working on a blog post for psychology today, because there's so many different veins of theories in psychology, and then now you have neuroscience to add to it, and there's actually different schools in neuroscience. So there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of new learning coming on. So a lot of people wouldn't know about R. Douglas Fields' work showing that white matter and junk, or what they call junk in the brain, is actually where all the interesting stuff goes on. I saw a blog post on Psychology Today just the other day saying, well, that white matter doesn't mean anything. Well, that white matter is probably how you know that you saw a Great Dane or Dalmatian, like I used to think it was in that picture. That's probably where all of those things are put together. And I do believe that you can use it better, get more conscious of it. So in the big picture, I like to think about this as psychological risk management, i.e., of course, we all know if you take care of the risk side, most of the rest of it takes care of itself. So given what we know about uncertainty, igniting uncertainty, you're going to make a judgment call. What do we know about how you make that judgment call, and therefore then how you start to think about psychological risk management? Well, you make the judgment call based on context. So, of course, and at first, that's how you say those two things all together at one time. The first thing, obviously, I mean, on the external side, you're looking at the markets, and your conscious and mostly unconscious pattern recognition is going to work. This isn't something you can stop, by the way, because your brain's looking for that unconscious pattern recognition. So what you want to do is think in terms of getting more conscious of what it is, which essentially the short version is instinct or impulse versus intuition and how that feels. Experiential learning is essentially the same thing. Unconscious pattern recognition, experiential learning, I was talking to two traders that I was coaching today, and both of them said it. if you're listening, you just have that feeling when you know you're wrong. But most of the time, we use our cognitive, intellectual abilities and even our math and our probabilities to talk ourselves out of it. We're learning to be aware of that element of mind-body cognition has this advantage that you really are using your brain in the way that it's perceiving and making judgment calls about risk. So a somewhat surprising fact is that neuroscience also shows complex decisions actually are best made non-deliberately. So in most cases in trading, we're essentially trying to stare down the answer out of our screens and out of our CQG data. But what we're best to do is look at that data and then turn away from it and let ourselves make our decisions when we're not actually trying to make a decision. So in a trading world, what that means is you have to build in ways of looking away from the screen, taking your attention off of it, which is exactly the opposite of what you think you're supposed to do. I mean, it's focus, 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 fight for every tick, fight for every tick. And ironically, it's letting that unconscious pattern recognition, that all of that stuff, all of the things that allow you to know which animals were on that page, go to work, and then listening to your mind and body for the right answer. So a trick is to figure out how to do this for yourself in the time frame you work, even if that means just turning your chair around for a few minutes. If it means turning your chair around, standing up, walking around the office, something that allows you to get away from the screen and temporarily turn your attention to something else, and then essentially listen to your whole mind-body complex for the answer that you want. You'll make better decisions. Now, you're also going to internal context. So a big piece of internal context is beliefs, what you come to the market already believing. By the way, Harry Markowitz in Portfolio Selection and Nobel Prize said beliefs is step one of asset allocation, but no one ever really goes back and analyzes beliefs, even though he warned in that paper to analyze beliefs. He warned 4 times. So I'd encourage everyone to be very conscious about what your beliefs are at any given point in time, because they are greatly influencing the context that's influencing the judgment in uncertainty, and you may be acting out those beliefs, turning the beliefs into behavior without knowing it if you're not actually trying to be conscious of what you believe. It doesn't matter what you believe. What it matters is if you know literally what you believe and why. And so within a belief, then you've got some feelings and emotions about it, because if nothing else, you have a confidence level or a level of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or fear, anxiety, and doubt. And so knowing both what the belief is and what your confidence level is, and I find it ironic, by the way, that we can talk on television or in research reports about conviction level. Well, essentially, what is that? How much do I believe this research that I'm presenting to you? But no one ever talks about really analyzing where is that conviction coming from? How is it influencing me today for the trader, never mind the research analyst? Knowing this part of your internal context will give you a much fuller data set for that judgment call you're going to be compelled to make in the fundamental uncertainty. So then a third element, and a very big element in internal context, are what I believe are fractal feelings, and I do believe it's fractal in the same sense of Mandelbrot's fractal geometry, cauliflower, broccoli, seed coast, all of the things he talks about. This only comes from the fact that I've worked with so many traders that we can figure out elements of their self-perception, elements of their self-image, elements of their expectation that affect how they feel and what they believe is going to happen, and then that affects what they perceive and what judgment call they make. And I could give you lots and lots of examples, and maybe if we have time later I will. But for now, just think in terms of where you want to get is more awareness of the internal context from a belief standpoint, a feelings and emotions, essentially confidence versus fear and how much, and know that there's this historical piece of what you're feeling that's a fractal representation of your history, and it's coming to play in your confidence and in your expectations. And then by making it conscious, you can take it somewhat out of the game so that you're not just acting it out on that behavior end of the spectrum. Okay, so all we're trying to do here is use neuroscience insights to create alpha. And I do want to make a side comment. There has been a fair amount of talk lately about John Coates' testosterone study, which I have no reason to doubt the study, but at the end of the day, it's sort of like, well, what do you do about it? Because whatever testosterone level you've got, right? And it's not like anybody's going to start taking steroids, or I don't think, or messing with their testosterone in order to, there's not any real good way to do it anyway, not like a doctor would help you do it. So this is about how to use your psyche to work with that reality. John Coates may be able to show that internally in your neurochemistry, it's testosterone that's making the difference. But my angle on it is, okay, let's use our thinking and our intellects actually to work with this whole mind, body, cognition, emotions, unconscious, because that's something that we can do something with. You know, changing our testosterone levels is not something we really have a lot of control over. So, in terms of how you just take this information and some awareness of it and try to say, okay, how do I make this practical? Well, I look at it this way. Let's aim to eliminate the worst 1.5 days a month. And why do I say 1.5? Because usually the worst 1.5 days of the month, or the worst couple of days of the month, starts out with a morning that's not too bad. Oftentimes even a morning you do well, and then you give some back. And then you give a little bit more back, and then somehow it turns into a losing day. And then it takes you at least another half day to recover. So I ask you to both think in terms of your last year of trading, how your P&L would look different if you had avoided those worst 1.5 days a month. But then I also ask you to set up your plans going forward for making judgment calls in uncertainty such that you want to avoid the worst 1.5 days a month. And if that's what you're trying to do, then you start to take this mind-body cognition, this role of feelings and emotions, this role of the unconscious, and you reorganize yourself such that you're better able to tap into their value and use them as an asset as opposed to a liability. So what does that mean in practicality? It means managing this cornerstone of physical and emotional energy. So it means breaks for your brain because you do get decision fatigue. It means breaks for your body because you do get overwhelmed with data, and back to complex decisions are best made non-deliberately. You very well make better trading decisions. There's really not any very well about it. I can pretty much guarantee you that if you can figure out a way to turn away from the screen, turn your attention to something else, and then make a trading decision, you're going to find over a period of time you're making better decisions. Essentially, what you're trying to do is allow all that unconscious pattern recognition to come to the surface where you can even hear it, where you can even be in touch with it. Now, part of getting there beyond the body movement, which is a technical thing that you can do, even if it's getting up to get a glass of water, is committing to doing feeling and emotion analytics and tracking so that you start to become aware of this dimension of thinking that's really proving to be more important than the intellectual part that we've all been trained to focus on and value. And the only way to sort of get to being able to use this feeling and emotion part is to start looking at it as data, right? And to start to get a sense of it, start to track it for yourself so that you know what it feels like, intuition, for example, versus impulse. Okay, I keep wanting to hit my mouse as opposed to the space bar. So here's some specific things that you can look for. You will misperceive risk when you're overly tired. So it makes no sense to fight for every tick. It also makes no sense to fight. It also makes no sense to trade all of the time. It also makes no sense to trade when you know that you're tired, because basically you can be relatively sure that you're going to give away money. In fact, like if I could convince a hedge fund to do this, like to instead of keeping their portfolio managers at the desk all day long, convince them to both not only gyms, which most of them have, but actually encourage people to take naps during the middle of the day, I could increase their performance. Now, it's really hard to get this very testosterone-laden world to believe that. But sooner or later, I'm going to get some group of portfolio managers who have got a chief risk officer or chief investment officer who will buy into this, and they're going to find out that taking breaks and naps is going to increase their performance. And I don't want to put a number on it, but I think the number would be shocking. So the second similar one, in the fact of mind-body cognition, is we know you react to red. We all react to red unconsciously, i.e., we can see our brain waves react sooner with higher spikes when you see red. So a very simple thing to do is just to take red off your screen. I'm working on working with a major broker at this point who also provides data, to take that really seriously and be able to just flip the switch where you use blue and yellow, for example, or green and purple. And I realize they're whacked out combinations. But the traders and portfolio managers who have taken this seriously already and taken the red off their screens altogether, I didn't expect this to happen, but they're all telling me that they really do actually feel the difference. The reason I didn't expect them to tell me they feel the difference is because the reaction's happening unconsciously. And so I thought, well, they just will be less reactive, but they won't necessarily know that they feel less reactive. And I was wrong about that. They do say that at the end of the day, they just don't feel as amped up. So I'd encourage you all to try that. A feeling you can always be looking for is the fear of missing out. And it's a really simple habit to get into the habit of asking yourself, am I acting out the fear of missing out? Because everybody does act out the fear of missing out, and it is the most common emotion, fear of future regret, don't want to give up what I might get, don't want to give up the reversal I might get in a losing trade. Every which way you look at a trade, there's the potential for future regret. And so it's there. It's just a question of you getting conscious that that feeling is there and putting in place mechanisms for yourself to help you not act it out. So, like, this is the simplest question for psychological risk management. And you start working with it. If you do nothing else, start asking yourself this question all the time. If you ask yourself this question all the time, you get up, walk away, you take body breaks, brain breaks, try to make complex decisions non-deliberately. I heard the original researcher put it that way, and I can't think of a better way to say it. In any event, that's a feeling you can really be on the lookout for in this feeling and emotion analytics. So net, I'm saying what I want you all to do, or let's put it this way, I'm sure if you do develop a personal system to know how intuition versus impulse feels, you're going to be able to have a better, more accurate perception of risk, and then therefore a better judgment call, that in that sense that you'll be compelled to make that judgment call. And as you make a better judgment call, you make a better decision, you don't act out a unconscious feeling or emotion, and net, your bottom line goes up. So, I click that mouse again. We talked about the fractal ideas before. Some of them that you can really be on the lookout for, and I will say fractal feelings tend to be more intense. They tend to be what drives the impulsive moves. So they also tend to not be the obvious. So it usually has nothing to do with the money. It has more to do with the fear of being wrong. We talked about the fear of missing out, but So it's in the impulsive category also. It's also in the competitive category. How am I doing related to the next guy, which does get back to John Coe's testosterone study. But the intensity of these things, fear of being wrong, fear of missing out, are how you can start to be aware of a fractal pattern of feelings that's influencing your perception. And without doing this work on this mind-body, emotional feeling level, you'd just be trying to work on the behavior, and the behavior and the intellect alone just aren't going to get you where you want to be, whether that's wherever your next level is. The angle of taking mind-body cognition, feelings and emotions, unconscious, specifically looking for the fear of being wrong and the fear of missing out, it's a huge resource to get you where you want to be. So personality patterns, people who take too little risk take too much risk, that there are historical answers in that. Yes, behavioral finance will talk about, if you take a loss, you're loss averse, etc. If you think about that, all of that, there is an evolutionary psychology take on that. You've taken a loss, and maybe statistically you should take the next trade in exactly the same way. But from an evolutionary self-preservation point of view, it probably doesn't make sense to take the next trade the same way. And I think understanding that what's really going on in an internal context, feelings and emotions, evolutionary psychology point of view is the clue to avoiding a number of mistakes. And also think about, if you do that, if you avoid the mistakes, if you avoid the acting out, if you avoid half of that worst 1.5 days, where does that put you from a mental or psychological capital point of view? If you don't trade when you're tired and you don't take those losses, as a specific example, it puts you in a position a few hours or a day or 2 days or whatever it is later to take advantage of whatever the market is doing now. So on one hand, you have better risk management through the psychological angle, but then that better risk management puts you in a position to also take advantage of the opportunity. And then put those two together, and I'm sure I don't need to go through any numbers. Everyone can at least conceptually understand what that's going to do to your overall numbers at the end of the month, quarter, or year. So, essentially, I'm recommending that you rethink risk thinking altogether. And yes, this is the cover of my book, which goes into a lot of this in more detail. And I think with that, we're pretty close to taking questions. Yeah.
Fantastic, Denise. I just want to let everyone know that 2 weeks ago we sponsored an event in New York City, and Denise was the guest speaker, on this same topic, your brain on risk. And, the audience was really riveted and had some great questions. So please, as I mentioned earlier, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, and we certainly have time to take them. And while all of you are thinking, because Denise put down some pretty interesting challenges there, I will just mention that our next webinar will be July 17th, and that's with Cynthia Case of Case Co. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of today's webinar, we will be having a drawing for Denise's book, Market Mind Games, a signed copy, and we will let you know who is the lucky recipient of that. And I'll give you all a minute more to submit any questions. And I see them starting to come in now. All right, so Denise, the first question is from Rob. Is discipline an intuitive function or not?
Is discipline an intuitive function or not? I don't think discipline is intuitive, but I also think what you need to be disciplined about is allowing your intuition to come through, and that's different than being disciplined about your behavior. So if you're disciplined about taking the neuroscience knowledge seriously, then your intuition will come through in a much louder way, in a much more efficient way, such that you can capitalize on it. That's a really interesting question.
All right. Our next question is from Bruno. Can you change the fractal pattern and correct some of the problematic aspects of your behavior?
Totally. Absolutely. It's a matter of becoming aware of it, putting it into words over and over and over, even putting it into words on like a systematic basis. I've taught traders to figure out what their fractal pattern is, and then in the morning when they're preparing, they just write it down. It's sort of the opposite of positive thinking, but what happens is by externalizing it and putting it into words, then they're not compelled to act it out. So it takes some self-analytical work to figure it out, and then the discipline to handle it the right way. And handling it the right way has to do with actually feeling the related feelings and emotions, articulating them, and then you're not sort of stuck, well, not just sort of, then you're not stuck in their grip unconsciously acting them out. But absolutely. And that's actually the funnest part. You figure out that you're, doing X, Y, and Z because of, something that happened in your history, and you can put two and two together, and you go, oh my gosh, that's why I always do that same thing in trading, no matter how many times I stop trying to do it. And then by handling it a completely different way, you find yourself doing it way fewer times. I mean, that's the gratifying part about the work that I do, and obviously gratifying to the clients.
All right, and we have a question from George. What is your opinion on the non-locality of subconscious?
What is my opinion on the non-locality of the subconscious?
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that right? Well,
yes.
There's non-locality for just about everything. Any study that you read these days, and you're still going to read a lot of them that say, the emotions are based in your amygdala, and, you do math here, and whatever other mental, psychological events that you can come up with, some neuroscientist somewhere will attribute it to one piece of your brain, and that model's wrong. It doesn't work like that. Like now we know that memories are completely distributed across the brain. Like I talked about the 2 + 2 = 4. So there's, it's happening in there somewhere, neurochemically, electrically, and through certain structures. But anyone who tells you that they know that exactly where something's happening or how it's happening is way overreaching. So essentially all your mental functions at this point can be described as not having locality because the system just doesn't work like that. Back to the white matter, back to the we need a whole new model of the brain. So, I don't think anybody can pinpoint a place. We might be able to we can pinpoint some waves, and we can pinpoint some blood flow. I mean, that's how they know that 2 + 2 = 4 is done differently if you started with an Asian language than English. But in terms of the actual, these are the pieces, parts, places, chemicals, locations, not a chance. So hopefully that gave you my opinion. If you meant something different by non-locality, I guess let me know.
All right, we have a question from Fred. How does removing red from my screen act in affecting my subconscious reactions to it?
You won't overreact. So what happens when you see red, you react more quickly. It stimulates you more as opposed to any other color. So you'll have less stimulation, and you'll be able to not react. And because it tends to signify losses, people tend to react. So it should lower your anxiety, net.
All right, and I guess that's good news for us here at CQG because all the colors are customizable on the screens, but certainly walking around I see a lot of red on a lot of screens. So
oh yeah, everybody uses it.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have a last question? All right. A question from Rob. Since money management is not of the realm of intuition, isn't being a good intuitive trader at odds with following rules of proper money management in a way? Or does that mean that money management is wearing two different hats?
Money management's important, but I think it's way overrated. I mean, most people will say through money management alone, you'll be successful. But I think there's a place for both and that they're different. And we've been depending too much on money management, and I think that you can liken money management to asset allocation and go all the way back to Markowitz, where he said you better know what you believe and why you believe it first before you get into allocating assets. But no one's ever taken a systematic viewpoint of that. So I'm not against money management. I just think it's way, way overrated, and that it's a tool that's sort of run its course. I mean, everybody knows how to do it, and they do what they do with it, and maybe you can get a little better with it, but there's a lot more edge to be had with going down this road of working in concert with how your brain perceives and judges uncertainty, in my opinion.
All right. And a question from Bruce. Are there any thoughts around experiences growing up, being the youngest, being the oldest, that naturally influence our decisions or behaviors?
Well, yeah. There's all, like at the end of the day, Bruce, it's all about your experiences growing up, but there are no generics. The only, if I were to come up with a generic, it would be the person who grew up in a household that was a perfectionistic household, maybe an engineer for a father, and then they tend to hesitate more because they think it has to be perfect. I mean, when I get somebody who calls me up and says, they see it, don't take it, I right away start to think, okay, are they trying to be a perfectionist? But I mean, I didn't focus on it here, but at the end of the day, it's the internal context that got put in place from, before you were born, the day you were born, the first 10 years of your life that's actually having the biggest influence on how you feel and how you come up with perceptions and expectations about risk. But I've also learned that while there are generics, fear of being wrong, for example, that's the opposite of perfection, it's also like a fingerprint. And one person's fear of being wrong is a totally different subjective experience than the next person's fear of being wrong. I'll say one more thing, though. Everybody, in some way, shape, or form, ends up feeling not good enough in some way, shape, or form. Either not good enough vis-a-vis the guy next to them, not good enough vis-a-vis their performance last year, not good enough vis-a-vis the hedge fund down the street. It's a human condition, and the market gives you, more so than any other realm, every opportunity to experience that. It's like this tick-by-tick assault on your ego. So you can be comforted, or at least assured from me, that everybody experiences the feeling not good enough, and you're only as good as your last trade, and what are you going to do next? And be trying to say, okay, where is that coming into play in how I'm feeling during the day and decisions that I might make that are fear of missing out decisions. Hopefully. Yeah.
All right, and I think that's a really good place to wrap up for today, if you think it is, Denise. If we didn't get to your question today, you can contact Denise directly at think@therethink.group.net, or if you have a question that you think of following the webinar. And as Denise mentioned, much of this is in her book, Market Mind Games, as well. So I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Denise, thank you so much again. And I think that's it. All right.